This is Brad Montgomery. Welcome to the Successful, Interesting, and Awesome podcast, where I interview people who are, wait for it, successful, interesting, and awesome. Or at least one of those three. Have you ever felt, my friends, that many different things swirl around in your brain and then they all just come together in one moment? In many ways, I feel like that's what this recording is. This is a recording where we talk with Jess Pettitt about Dave Chappelle. Because in the past, maybe 5 or 6 years, I've really been trying to wrap my mind around about what it's like to be something other than a white, straight, middle-aged guy. What is it like to be gay? What is it like to be queer? What is it like to be trans? What is it like to be non-binary, non-conforming? I don't know. It's confusing to me. And if I'm honest with you, it's a little bit uncomfortable to think about it sometimes. But I love learning about this stuff because I feel like I'm growing. And then what else can we add into that? We can add into the cancel culture and what it's like to be judged by other groups. We can add into that race, because if we haven't been talking about and thinking about race in the past 2 years, right? This is a big year for race. And Dave Chappelle covers it all in his specials, but this last one in particular, I thought really just he just hammered it in all of the best ways. So happily, my friend Jess kind of helped me sort through it and decode it and articulate some of the bigger themes that are going on. And then really it's just a conversation. So if you're interested like I am in race and gender and sexuality, if you're interested and I am about controversy, like what it's like to be really angry at people, and if you're interested like I totally am in humor and comedy and what's funny and what's not funny and what's offensive and what's not offensive, well, then this conversation is for you. I just love the way it turned out, and I'm really glad you're here for the ride. So enjoy this thing. Now, before we go on, I think with some of these topics that are a little bit more controversial, I get a lot of emails from you that are very flattering, and I think you just don't want to make the public comments, and I appreciate you for that. But I'm telling you, also, I could use your help. Hit like and share. Help me get the word out. Go to Apple Podcasts and review this thing. It's the number of emails I get is so disproportionate to the comments and reviews we get on Apple. It's amazing. So do me a favor and help me grow this thing. Go to Apple, subscribe, leave a review, share this with your friends. I'm really flattered for your comments, and I'm grateful for the company on this project. So, all right, thank you for that. Enjoy Jess Pettitt as we talk about Dave Chappelle. So have you been watching the news? Part of the news is that Dave Chappelle has a new special out. And in the past 3 specials, he has made jokes about the trans community. And if you listen to Dave Chappelle, the trans community hasn't been that happy about that. And then he has this last special out called The Closer. And in The Closer, he really addresses all these topics. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be cool if we could bring in somebody who's used to being funny for a living? Because when you're funny for a living, you think about these things a lot. And wouldn't it be funny if we had an expert on diversity and inclusion and gender? And wouldn't it be great if this person was a fantastic kind of decoder of all of these things? And I don't mind telling you I need her because a lot of this is new to me. I'm a middle-aged, straight, white guy. I'm trying, but it's confusing. So lucky us, we got Jess Pettitt. She is my buddy. She's a rock star. She's funny, but also she's just smart. Hey, Jess.
Hi, thanks for having me. I love talking about these kind of topics, but most importantly, I like hanging out with you.
Okay, that's it. That's all I needed to hear. We're done. All right, well, you and I have been talking about this a lot. And so first of all, I want to know if you think Dave Chappelle's funny.
I think he is very funny, and I think of the living male comedians right now, he is one of, if not the best stand-up that is doing work right now.
Agree, 100%. But is the next question related? Is Dave Chappelle offensive?
I definitely would categorize his style of humor as highly offensive, if not at least mildly electrically charged.
All right, so to me, that's the first topic. Is it possible to be offensive and funny? I know my mom would not agree with you. That she'd be like, he's not funny. He's offensive. He can't get over the funny. My mom used to say when she knew I was interested in comedy. Oh, I hate comedy. Don Rickles, he insults people, and I'm like, comedy's bigger than that, Mom. But is like, how can you be offensive and funny?
I mean, ultimately, I think, I mean, you're a comedian as well, but when you are finding your lane of how you want to do funny, there's a million different ways of doing it. And like I for example, like let's take our keynote styles as an example. There's a million ways of doing it. We both use humor. I purposely dive into controversial topics that make people super uncomfortable. Because if we can have a conversation about guns, needles, abortion, light things, then you're far more likely to have a conversation with your coworker or your uncle or your child. Because that's really what matters. So I put the stuff that we call scary in the forefront because I have an ulterior motive. Chappelle uses offensive topics and rides that line in a way that brings humor to a lot of unspeakable topics, but his ulterior motive is about race. And as a Black man, he is talking and deconstructing whiteness in a very funny way. And the LGBT or trans community, mostly white, gay, and lesbian and trans folks, are being caught in the middle of that. And kind of missing the point, but
Mm.
are incredibly offended. And so I don't want to invalidate their offense, but that's not his point.
I'm not sure if Dave Chappelle would say, "Well, it's okay if you're offended, but it's also funny." And I think he
No, I
might.
think
At some point, he said, "I can't imagine being in such a heavy circumstance as being trapped in the wrong body or a different body than you were born in, and then and not trying to find the humor just to stay sane."
yeah, and I think in our last iteration of the conversation too, we talked that there are gay and lesbian folks who find it funny. There are trans people who find it funny, and there are non-binary people who also find it funny. And there are also people, and sometimes those same people, who at times want to dictate that I can find this funny, but you're not allowed to find it funny. And that is the line of humor. That's literally what stand-up is trying to ride that line, not just based on topics, but what am I allowed to pull out as ironic or as
Right.
unexpected or humor. Mhm. That's what we do.
Ooh, there was a lot in there, Miss Jess. Like, am I allowed to say you can't think it's funny?
Yeah.
That's
I mean, technically, and he addresses this in Closer, it's art. And you are absolutely allowed to not like art. That's why art is made, is for people to love it and like it. And the artist themselves is expressing something that they don't even know how it will be consumed by other people. Same thing with authoring a book. Is I hope this goes well, but I have to do this.
right.
That's art.
Mm. We're coming back to Dave Chappelle, but we're taking a teensy detour. I want to talk about Andrew Dice Clay just for a second.
It's funny. I thought of him last conversation too. Go ahead.
Is he funny?
I don't
Like
find him funny.
him in his heyday, was he funny?
Uh-huh. I never found him funny, but I do think he played a very good father in Star is Born to Lady Gaga.
Well, because I remember thinking about when he was hot and on fire, and people would say he's not funny, and then I would think he sold out Madison Square Gardens, I think 5 nights in a row, and although I wasn't in the room, I think they were laughing their butts off.
Uh-huh.
And so it kind of brings up the topic: what does it mean to say are you funny? Because like he's funny if making Madison Square Gardens rock is funny,
Yeah.
but I'm
I
with
mean,
you. I didn't. He wasn't my cup of tea.
it's funny to the audience that found it funny, and it's not funny to the audience that didn't find it funny. Jeff Foxworthy is another great example. I think Jeff Foxworthy is, especially in his heyday, is hysterical. And part of it is because I relate so deeply to the mockery that he's making of Southerners
Right.
specifically. But I also, as an upper class Southerner, know that I teetered that line between lower economics and upper economics in the South. It's very funny to me, but it's only funny to me because of my particular background.
If you would have told me Jess Pettitt loves Jeff Foxworthy, I would have said, nah, she has a mild appreciation.
Oh no, I really liked him. I actually went and saw him live, like bought tickets to see him live.
I think the guy's totally skilled, but maybe because I'm not from the South, I feel like you might be a redneck. If to me, all of that just feels like the premise is not even that funny.
Yeah, and what a great example of so one of audience when comedians start talking about humor, it's never funny. So if you came today expecting to like super giggle, just know that we're going to get real boring real quick. And here is an example. Okay, hey Brad, I have a business idea. I'm going to say the same setup over and over and over and
Yeah.
over again, and it's just going to get funnier. What do you think? No one would say that would work.
Yeah, crazy.
But like your mama jokes work. You might be a redneck if works. It can work if you are all in it. And it's not going to work for everyone, but it certainly works for some.
Yeah, it's so uncommon. Ingeval had that. Here's your sign. If you blah 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 blah, here's your sign. That the fact that works isn't crazy, and the number of people who could pull that off seems very slim. We got a little question here from Palmo. Hey, yeah. Palmo, nice to see you. Ooh, I need to change these words. Do you think the old adage of tragedy plus time equals comedy is still applicable, or does it boil down to who's making the comment?
Oh, see, I think that's a good question, and I'm cheating because I think it's both true. I think that there are. What immediately came to me thinking about it was a meme recently in reference to Robin Williams, and I found the meme very funny, and I was comforted by like remembering Robin in like a really positive, nurturing way.
Right.
Well, evidently people kept forwarding that meme to Robin's daughter Zelda, and Zelda was like, "Please stop doing this." So Zelda didn't find it funny. That doesn't mean it's not funny. It just means that tragedy and time haven't equated comedy yet for Zelda, right? And she's allowed to take as much time as she needs and hold on to tragedy as much as she needs to, and may never ever get to comedy. She's allowed to do that.
Right, but is she that? But that there's so many mixed up things here because we have so many topics. Is she allowed to say, and you're not allowed to laugh either? And if you do, then you're an idiot. We need to cancel the person who made the joke.
People are definitely apt to do that currently. And I don't think I can prevent her from using those words in that order, but I think it's ineffective.
And welcome back to our regular scheduled program. We took a detour, but we are back now. For just joining us, we're talking about Dave Chappelle, yo. All right, so some people are offended by Dave Chappelle, and because you are an inclusion and diversity expert, could you help me understand what you take as the big offense? Like, if the trans community is offended, can you help me understand what they're offended by?
Sure. So I think that it kind of falls into 3 buckets. And I'm going to try and do this quick so that I don't talk too much. But if you have additional questions or comments or something, please feel free to put them in there. I do this for a living, so I forget what people do or don't know. So feel free to ask questions. So the first bucket is what I would kind of call, you don't have the right to tell jokes about me because you're not one of me, right? So like in-group language, out-group language. So in Closer, specifically, Chappelle is very specific about identifying himself as a cisgender man, meaning he doesn't identify as trans or non-binary. He's heterosexual, and should not be talking about the gay and lesbian or trans community. And yet, here I go, right? So like, so first bucket is you're not one of us. You shouldn't be telling these jokes.
Love it.
Second bucket is that when you are talking about trans-related issues, and specifically when Dave Chappelle is doing it, most people, Dave Chappelle is one of them, conflate sex and gender as if they're synonyms. And sex in this context actually is about anatomy and biology, which socially we don't ever talk about it, even though we tell dick jokes all the time. We don't typically talk about the genitalia, chromosomal, hormonal makeup of an actual person, let alone critique that in a public way. Except for dick jokes, for some reason, that's good to go.
I'd like to thank you for saying dick jokes twice. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. If it helps, I censored some of the other options.
JessPettitt.com, everybody.
so because we're socially not supposed to talk about our body parts, let alone other people's body parts, to do that is already too edgy for people because of bucket number one. Because trans people specifically, as you have stated, there's a lack of alignment between how they identify and what their physical body is doing. Literally, if you'd like to get nerdy for a second, cis, the prefix of cisgender, CIS, is a Latin prefix meaning congruent. So, Brad, you and I are cisgender because how we identify is actually congruent with how we were labeled at birth. Not everybody has that, right? So then for someone who is cisgender to be talking about people's anatomy and biology is already like off the rails. But then to be critiquing someone's gender performance and conflating it as like it's a synonym with sex is fallible, right? Like that's not accurate, and it often is rooted in a lack of understanding, ignorance, if not transphobia. So then that's kind of the second bucket is you chose poorly and hit a hot rail and kind of didn't do it very good.
Right.
Bucket number two.
Bucket number two, by the way, is I got like a massive amount of questions about bucket two.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm here for.
Good.
And then briefly, bucket number three is he is very clear his target is about whiteness. And white people, including myself, can have subordinated and marginalized identities, can identify as gay or lesbian or trans or non-binary or something else, and have a very hard time focusing on being white when they have the experience of being subordinated or marginalized or oppressed. So then coming from a white, gay, lesbian, trans place versus coming from a white place, which he's very clear is the target audience he's shooting for, that's bucket number three.
I feel like I'm in Algebra 1 and I'm in a calculus class.
I know. I'm so sorry. I'm trying quite hard if it helps.
There's a lot of vocabulary in there.
Yeah.
I think what you're like, one of the jokes he talks about was, or the premises anyway, is trans people will complain to him. And he says, well, you have an advantage because now you can be white, not just trans. Do you remember that? There was a joke of somebody, a trans person calls the cops on him.
Right.
And he's like, well, that's because you're white. If we were both black, you wouldn't be calling the cops.
Because from a privileged place, white people usually are not endangered by calling the police officers, whereas a person of color,
right,
black, indigenous, etc., would potentially be in danger by calling the police.
Am I in the third bucket still? You started out by calling it whiteness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Third bucket. Yeah. So the wanting to default to whiteness when it's beneficial is much easier, and that's what his comedy is about. So like he goes on this big riff about how much more progress the LGBT movement has made versus the civil rights movement. But it's because it's being led primarily by white people. And I think even with organizations I do consulting work with, they're far more likely to have a conversation about gender inclusion or transitioning, a coworker transitioning at work, than they are to talk about racism at work.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because I think what you're leading to is a lot of what Chappelle is talking about is not trans, it's not sex, it's not gender, it's just being black in America.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And notice that is what he can talk about because he is black in America. right? So he's being called out for talking about things that he shouldn't be talking about, but he's doing it in the guise of talking from his own experience.
Yeah, right, because I get it. Okay, you're doing great.
Yeah, the where this came from last time, or where this led, was if I can't tell jokes about being a parent because I don't have children. I can tell jokes about my friends that are parents, but I'm doing it from my perspective as a kidless person. That's the similar choice he's making right now.
Right, but I kind of feel like anyone ought to be able to joke about being a parent, whether or not you have kids.
Well, I mean, freedom of speech, protected speech. Yeah, sure, you can.
Yeah. But, by the way, we should just say really quickly, context is relevant, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Right. You and I are paid to speak in front of corporate and healthcare and, government audiences. We are paid not to mention any of the topics we've brought up so far today. And especially, you're not allowed to tell dick jokes. But, he's a comedian with his own special and a camera crew there to capture what he does.
Uh-huh.
So, all right, the context is important.
Context is huge.
The question really started out as, why is he offensive, or how do you see him to be offensive to the trans community? Let's break some of those down.
Sure.
So let's start with the gender and sex thing, because you said he conflates gender and sex. And at some point,
bucket number 2.
He says, this is the crux. I think he even says it in the special. I just watched it again. This is the crux. What makes is a woman a woman?
Mm-hmm.
And he answers that question by saying, of course, a trans woman is a woman. But that private part, that's his joke. He just says, he does, and then the audience laughs hilariously. So I think that's what you're saying. He's saying that your gender can be woman, but you don't have you're. So can you comment on this? What do you think?
Sure. So most people refer to it as plumbing.
Oh, plumbing.
Right?
Thank you.
You can be a woman, but you don't have the right plumbing. You can be a man, but you don't have the right plumbing. But what's ironic about that is socially, we don't generally know what anybody's plumbing is unless we know what their plumbing is, right? And it's not socially acceptable to volunteer that information or talk about it. So what happens when someone finds out, or someone reads someone else as something's going on there? Right. Now you know that you don't know what their plumbing is. So now you get defensive. Same thing happens with pronouns.
Wait, back up. Say that again. Now,
yeah.
That last thought was a good one, but I'd lost it.
Yeah. So when you assume you know something and then you find out that you don't know it, you're going to get defensive. So whether we're talking about plumbing, in this case we're talking about genitalia, and I segued to pronouns on purpose, because we think we know what pronouns to use for someone until they tell us we're wrong. And then when they tell us we're wrong, we get so defensive, we default to grammar, right? But the person's just telling you that you made a bad assumption. You made an assumption in the first place. So same thing happens with body parts. So what Dave Chappelle is talking about is that I'm paraphrasing his jokes into not funny, but if you pass as a woman or you pass as a man, I don't care. But if you're floating somewhere in between, you need to figure it out really quickly because it makes me uncomfortable. So that gets to context about my defensiveness. I'm defensive because I'm uncomfortable. But he is very clear and very honest that he's aware that he's uncomfortable because he's not used to it. And he's got some learning to do.
Right. He is open about that. Yeah. See, I'm following you, but can we officially enter the stage where I could possibly ask a question that makes me look like a dumbass?
You're not going to look like a dumbass. Go for it.
I think Dave Chappelle, if he knows a person is trans, is not hung up on whether or not there's been surgery to change the plumbing.
Well, I
I
mean,
think he says at some point every human being came through the legs of a woman. So if you are a trans woman, whether or not you have had surgery, you're still in what he calls that hilarious predicament where you're born in a body other than the one was assigned at birth. So a surgery changes many things, but it doesn't change for him what would be are you know that question that all of the jokes are about. Are you a woman?
right. Well, so since the late 50s, it is very important to mention that women have written about the uh, paradox of what it means to be able to give birth, to grow a baby. And what's fascinating is not all females, biological term, women, gender term, not all biological women can give birth, but they are still successfully navigating the world as a woman.
Right.
We don't walk around with our genitalia out and about at a grocery store. We perceive someone's femininity or masculinity, and then we write a whole story about it. But it's not necessarily true. But what ends up happening in this conversation is we center the ability to reproduce. Now, if I were to go like late 60s, right? It is the obsession with reproduction is because men can't do it. It's like one thing men can't do. So that's kind of is a long history here of this. So if you can't do it, you're not a real woman. But a lot of women actually internalize what it means if they can't get pregnant or they can't give birth, or as a woman who doesn't have children, my validity has been questioned
Mm.
by mostly people sitting next to me on the airplanes. So there's something here, right? And that's kind of a different topic. But what he is saying and where he's making an error of conflating sex and gender together is realness is not up to you, right? So he tells a story about his friend Daphne. And what is really powerful is at some point, Daphne says, "Can I just have a human
Yeah.
experience?" Right? And he says, it's not about pronouns and it wasn't about vocabulary. It was just permission to be a human.
Yes.
So many trans men have given birth. And so he talks a lot about men or women, trans women using a bathroom and who he
Yeah.
wants to be at a urinal next to, etc.
Yeah.
But the conversation is usually stilted towards trans women. And then trans women are seen as deceivers or liars, right? Which again is about this is a man in a dress, which segues into predatorial behavior like men can't control themselves, etc. But if you take the same argument and you put it to the other side, again, this is a very binary conversation. But if you're the other side around trans men, it all falls apart because a trans man has given birth or could give birth,
Right.
assuming they could, whatever. That's not the point. The point is that it makes him uncomfortable. And it makes him uncomfortable because he thought he knew and he doesn't know, and now he knows he doesn't know. But he's honest about that. That's
Yeah.
the human experience.
I am following you and I am learning from you. For example, I hadn't articulated that in my mind. There are women who, for whatever reason, are not able to have babies. So are they women or are they in the
Right,
same bucket as trans women? And it's
right,
confusing. So, yes, thank you for that education. And I think what Dave Chappelle would say is, oh, come on, Jess, you know what I mean.
right.
You
100%.
know it's not fertility. And so he'd
No,
be like,
it's
come on, really? I
no, no,
think.
no,
I
no.
don't know. I'm guessing.
Exactly. Right. So what is interesting is because we don't talk about genitalia, right? So what you know what I mean? Lack of a penis. There's a lot of people who don't have penises who also do not have vaginal canals or uteruses. Is that what you mean? No, that's not what I meant. You're making me uncomfortable using big words. I have had a complete hysterectomy, so I don't have ovaries, fallopian tubes, or a uterus. Am I still a woman? Pretty sure I'm still a woman. So the arguments fall apart. But the reason why the arguments fall apart is it wasn't about that in the first place. What it's about is I'm uncomfortable. So then to go one step further into his episodes without or his jokes without ruining the show is at one point Daphne's backstage, his trans woman friend, is backstage and is hysterical and holding her own, holding court.
Yeah.
And from that position, he, I believe, began to respect her as a human because of what the skill it is to hold your own as a comedian. But it took that for her to become a human to him. Not whatever her junk looks like or doesn't look like, or whether she has or hasn't given birth. And in this case, she has a daughter, right? Like,
Right.
she has a family. That it's an important piece that isn't the point. And but the way that he does it makes it very easy, back to bucket number 3, for white people to focus solely on the mistakes made in bucket number 2, so that bucket number 3 is missed.
Yeah, I'm not ignoring bucket number 3, which is the race thing. I'm just
no, we started there. We're just working our way backwards.
I know. Dave Chappelle says in his specials, "Oh, that made me awkward. That made me uncomfortable," or however he phrases it. So I definitely see what you see, which is he is uncomfortable, and I think we, well, like, as I don't know, me, I'm a straight white guy. I'm uncomfortable with things I don't know about yet. But that's what makes it funny. I mean, that the fact that there's some emotional baggage to this is exactly the reason he picks it.
And what he's being transparent about in, this is the most important part, his comedy special, right? Like, he has worked on these jokes and these stories for his audience who are buying tickets to show up and hear him be funny about offensive topics, because that is the flavor of comedy they are expecting. So in the Facebook chat, there was a comment about, don't make jokes about women unless you're a woman. Don't make jokes about Italians unless you're Italian.
Yeah.
And then don't even do it. Making jokes about the mafia is always bad. But what I think is important is it's not that these topics are off limits. It's that you're making jokes or telling stories about your perspective of these things that you are not. And you have to be able to own that, right? Like, I'm not a magician. I can make jokes about my experience with magicians, but I can't make jokes as a magician. And that matters, I think.
Come on, like, magician is a great example because it's non-offensive. In every sitcom that where they bring in a magician, the magician is the butt of the joke. So the writers and everyone's making fun of magicians, and the reason it works is because it's funny, and no one has to say, like, well, you can't say that because you're not a magician. They're just like, it just is. It's funny.
Yeah,
and so I think that's where Chappelle is. Like, this hilarious predicament is funny. Of course, we should talk about it. He talks about everything, especially the ones that are heavy.
Yeah, not the women, but the topics.
I see what you did there.
As a plus size woman, I can do that. You would get in trouble. Right. Yeah.
All right. So he talks about the word TERF, and as a inclusion expert, diversity expert. So I wrote it down: trans exclusionary radical feminist.
Truth.
And he says this is like blacks being mad at people in blackface because you're like, hey, you're an imposter. Mm-hmm. Does he, in your perspective as an expert in all of these things, is he got that right? What's a TERF?
No, he actually did quite good on that part, I think. He's very clear, and he kicks off the whole show talking about being a feminist, right? Mm-hmm. So then he kind of builds this arc. Those of you that are building stories, here's the arc. So he lands on TERF, and he says, I don't identify as a trans person. I don't identify as a woman. I don't identify as LGBT. But I'm a feminist, so I get to have an opinion here. And the premise of his approach is claiming that he is evidently a TERF is that he is uncomfortable. And if that's transphobic, then it's transphobic because he is aware that he doesn't have enough context experience with non-binary or gender non-conforming people. and it makes him uncomfortable. And he is taking responsibility that means on a group membership level, yep, he's probably a TERF.
All right. I'm just sorry for the third graders amongst us.
Mhm.
When's recess? What did you just say? There are so many words in there that you're just so comfortable with, but I'm like, what? I said, does he have turf right? And you said yes, but then go again.
Is there group membership? Is that the part?
Yeah. No, I've heard of group membership like Costco.
Yeah, exactly. So,
You keep focusing on the fact that he is owning the fact that he's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I think he says that he's uncomfortable when in fact he's not uncomfortable. I think he's totally comfortable with people who are different from him. And I don't see how that's such a main ingredient in his comedy and judging whether or not it's offensive or not, or what. But I sense I'm missing something, and I don't understand what it is.
interesting. This is why you have to tell me when I say things that don't make sense, because I thought you were going somewhere entirely different. I haven't thought about it till right now, but I think what I mean by focusing on him, role modeling discomfort. Again, if bucket number 3, his target audience is white people also need to be comfortable with what makes them uncomfortable. And I think he's role modeling that in the closer. And that as a man, a cisgender man, he is uncomfortable with transition, non-binary, gender changes, body changes, plumbing issues. These make him uncomfortable and he doesn't know about them. That doesn't mean that he can't have a friend or he can't learn more or that he's disinterested in learning more, but he's, leaning into that level of discomfort and is encouraging white people to do the same thing. Which again, my language is from a dominant privileged identity, being able to understand, I don't get that thing over there. I don't know what that means. I don't get it.
Right.
To use the platform as an example of what it means to acknowledge that you don't understand something might mean that you come off as transphobic or turfy or something like that. And it's an accurate description of what's happening now. Similar, though he didn't say it, when white people are addressing being white, you're gonna come off racist. Yeah. So get comfortable being uncomfortable and do your own work. I hadn't thought about that until you just asked that question.
It's so funny to me because you and I are buddies, but we're still meeting each other, and I don't totally get it. When you said you didn't think about that just now, what is it that you didn't think about? Because some things that are like I see you as being so fluent in this world, and you've thought about things and understood them, and they're in you now. And I'm just barely holding on to the vocabulary. Right? So I'm trying. I feel like I've got my fingernails on it.
Yeah, but I'm not trying to use fancy vocabulary words, but I talk about these ideas all the time.
Right.
So when you asked me about why I keep coming back to being uncomfortable, you weren't asking me about vocabulary words, which I'm more used to. You were asking me about why am I beating this drum? And I had to stop and think, why am I beating this drum?
I get it.
And then
Okay.
I realized,
I get
in order for real change to happen, we're going to have to understand what makes us uncomfortable and be responsible for it. Take the licks.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for that. Last thing you want to do in the world, people take a note, is have a podcast and come out as somebody who just doesn't really get it. But I find myself saying that a lot to you. But that does help. I think you're right. One of the reasons we are drawn to Dave Chappelle is he brings up big topics that make us go, ah. So he's not saying, I was on an airplane, here's a joke about an airplane. I was at Denny's, here's a joke about a Grand Slam. He's talking about things that are heavy and scary and, to use the right word, uncomfortable. So I get it. He's part of that is I think he's trying to be an educator. He's got an agenda. He's really wants us to understand the world through his eyes.
Sure. But I would also challenge you, Brad, that my experience of your work is about perseverance and motivation and dealing with when you feel uninspired or deflated, right? Like that's not an area of expertise of mine. And I mean, I'm being deflated is an expertise, but like getting out of that and like getting through my own forest, right? So we just happen to be talking about something that I talk about all the time.
Right.
But in talking to you, I'm still going to get to a place that's really thought provoking, right? And you do the same thing too. You just have a different expertise.
Yeah.
You're not an idiot.
Thank you. Well, you're yeah, I think this is one of your superpowers and why your clients clamor for you, because you're able to talk about things that we are just barely understanding in ways that are helpful and not, we don't feel insulted or defensive because you're good at this. All right, let's go back to turf. We're going back to turf.
Okay, do it.
And we're already there, I guess, but we have to go back to the bucket number 2. You're talking about conflating gender and sex. That's one of his mistakes.
Right.
Is it a fair premise to say a trans woman has differences from a person who was assigned female at birth? Is that a fair premise? And is that like, can you comment on that? Because it seems to me it's fair to Chappelle. He makes us laugh. You and I agreed he's funny. But the people who are offended by that are like, that is an unfair premise.
Yeah.
You can't do not notice my Adam's apple. That is offensive.
Yeah. My initial inclination is yes, of course, they have different lived experiences. And as a cisgender person, I hesitated saying that because similarly, this is a vulnerable reality that women are trying to navigate the world. Trans women are trying to navigate that woman's world, and they're being policed by both women and men. And so it's a really vulnerable reality that can be funny and can be true at the same time. When it's easy to say, don't look at my Adam's apple, but that's an anatomical response to testosterone in your body at puberty. But socially, it's like a tip-off of a failure of being perceived the way you want to be perceived. And you had no say in it. It was completely it's not your fault at all how your body responded to puberty. But in our society, it's a big deal. It's a very big deal. And the vulnerability that comes with that, not to be super Debbie Downer, it's vulnerable to one level, but it leads to death and violence, like significant acts of violence.
Right.
So there's a part of me that wants to say, yes, they've had different experiences, but those experiences are so statistically more likely to be life-threatening and deadly than cisgender women, but cisgender women so much more so than men.
Yeah.
It's a bold choice for a punchline.
And I think it's well done you to bring that up, because if we're talking about whether or not Dave Chappelle's offensive and funny, we tend to leave out the heavy stuff, right? Like this suicide and violence and
underemployment, housing, employment discrimination, etc. And he's, by virtue of being a black man, he's far more likely to be killed for not using a turn signal. Like these are realities in our society.
I'm wondering if there's a difference for Dave Chappelle to talk about the premise of trans women having, he mentions knuckles and Adam's apples. If there's a difference between that concept as a premise versus I'm at a location and I see a person and I make fun of her Adam's apple and knuckles. Because that strikes me as like unbelievably horrible, but
Mhm.
somehow doing it from the stage, just talking generally about this concept, seems less horrible. What do you think?
I would agree that that's less horrible, but I think it's still on the spectrum of like a bold choice. And I'm going to call it a bold choice because he made the choice and he's all in on that choice, right? But the reality is that we all have knuckles and we all have vocal cords. Just some of us aren't policed by other people. And when that policing is more likely to result in death, that is a choice I wouldn't make.
Yeah. All right. Are there any premises that you think we couldn't go to? So Dave Chappelle has proven that lots of things, which are bold choices, somehow make us laugh. You and I said he's
Mhm.
funny. Are there things out there that you just can't, that no one ever, like theoretically, could make funny?
Technically speaking, I would say no. And maybe that's like the most depressing part of our talk. But every topic has the ability of shedding light on pain. And when you shed light on pain, sometimes it gets more painful and sometimes it exhales into laughter.
Mm,
And I think any topic could do that. Now, again, I think it was Palmo said tragedy plus time equals comedy. How much tragedy and how much time and how funny is it, I think is pretty subjective. So even selling out Madison Square Garden 5 nights in a row, those people found that very funny. Probably not all of them, but
right.
most of them did. I was not there.
I remember asking this very question about what would be the worst premise that would get speakers like you and I in the most trouble. And we were talking about Vietnam vets, cancer, a 9/11 survivor. Put those three characteristics on one person and tell a joke, and you know, no good.
Yeah. I when you started listing them off, I was trying to guess what you came up with. So in my list, I came up with recent miscarriages.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, that's I don't know how much time that takes, but a lot, I think is the answer. Child cancer, terminally ill children, that's kind of off limits. Abused animals. Like somebody somewhere can make all six of those things funny.
well yeah.
I'm going to choose not to do that.
Come to think of it, you didn't mention this, but Dave Chappelle made a joke about child molestation in regards to Michael Jackson in a different special,
Mhm.
right? And he made a joke, I think, in this special about child molestation from a priest. He made a
Mhm.
joke about that. Those are like horrible topics.
Mhm.
And by the way, those jokes came out funny. I laughed.
Mhm. And to me, that's the craft. That's what art is, right? Is that what we are doing as humorists is trying to find a joke that no one else has told before. And that's really hard because there's not even new ideas.
Mm.
So there's no new ideas, but I'm going to make you see something funny for the first time. Like that's the adrenaline rush of when it works. And that's the dopamine kick of
Mm.
a bomb. Um, and most people don't talk about both of those as positives, but when you bomb, you found a rail, so you know to back up a little bit. And when it's amazing, to at least for me, when oh my gosh, what did anyone record it? I make jokes all the time that the best thing for Twitter is that it captures my one-liners that I don't even know I've said.
There's this guy who he's no longer with us. He was my dad's generation. And when we would meet at parties, we would go to the corner and we would look around and make sure we were safe. And then we would tell the jokes that we had been collecting to tell the audience of one. Like for Lindsey Smith, I would tell him jokes I would not tell anybody on the planet. I might tell you, but never while we're recording because they are just horrible. But we had this kind of collection going of like, Lindsay, have you got a joke that is unbelievably bad? You know, that you can't tell? Yeah, Brad, it's great. I can't wait to tell you.
Mhm.
But like my mom, there's so many people that would just go crazy. such a fascinating. I mean, I think one of the reasons I'm drawn to Chappelle is because he is exploring things that I know in my job I couldn't touch. Not only with a 10-foot pole, I just couldn't touch from this solar system. Impossible. And then I thought, how does he do that? It's just so fascinating to me, and it makes me daydream. Like, imagine saying anything you wanted with no.
Well, when you first invited me to this, you said that your biggest takeaway the first time you saw the closer was you couldn't imagine that amount of freedom on stage,
Yeah,
you know? And to me, again, if we're talking about art, isn't that what art does? Is it like lifts your spirit into this whole new place? Like I
yeah.
can look at a ceramics piece or a painting or some or a movie or, you know, a sunset even, right? Like I can look at something and I'm like elevated and lifted. And what I heard when you said it was that you feel some constraints, that you have manifested your entire career inside those constraints so that the buyer and the audience and everybody are satisfied, if not thrilled, but they're certainly not upset, you know?
Well, there's.
And
I'm gonna ask you, is what we do for a living art? But part of the feeling behind me saying imagine being that free, like Dave Chappelle. Imagine having that. You're allowed to say anything as long as they laugh. It's okay, I guess. Part of that is the fear that I've shared with you offline. Like I walk on stages now, and now through virtual presentations, I feel terrified that I'm going to say the wrong pronoun, I'm going to use non-cisgendered wrong, or I'm going to just somehow step in it in a way that massively screws me up. And so, I mean, like, I'm not just sort of kind of interested in wondering what I'm not allowed to say. I'm scared to death. Like, literally, I'm very nervous about it.
yeah, I think that that also, now I'm probably going to get way diversity, equity, and inclusion here for a second, but I think that is also our comfort in knowing the rules of the game. Like, we know how to win at this game, and then we just found out that we don't.
Yeah.
So we're like reading the fine print on the cardboard box we found behind the couch, and we're like, I don't know what I'm doing. What are the rules? And there aren't. And the best way to do something that garners some sense of inclusion is to recognize there are no directions here. And so, like, I think, Brad, you do a really excellent job, honestly, of knowing what you know, knowing what you don't know, and knowing there is a whole other third category of stuff you have no idea you don't know, right? But that's far more vulnerable and present and authentic, right? That's where curiosity and generosity come from. And that's the piece that I think is so funny when looking at Dave Chappelle, is that I think his generosity and his curiosity gets lost because he's being so vulnerable and so authentic in a way that makes it super controversial.
Mm.
And so people can't embrace their own power and privilege because they got uncomfortable. And they shut down any sense of curiosity or generosity, and they go in for the kill. And it's art. I think
I,
what we do is art. He states at one
yeah,
point, keep it
I
in the
still hear
comments.
people. That silence is me totally thinking.
Yeah,
Totally
I think
thinking.
when he says keep it in the comments, that's when I think you know that it's a performance piece, right? Is that this is his job,
Right.
you know?
Well, I mean, so you and I go, we are hired by people who say, you don't know Jess Pettitt, but I do, and I'm going to put her in front of you because it's going to be good for you, or you're going to like her, or whatever. You're going to find value. So when you go out there, are you doing art? Because you have a different topic than I do, and you really are able to talk about a lot of things that I'm not allowed to talk about because they hire you for that.
Mm-hmm.
But before I'm hired, it's very common for my clients to say, Brad, you're not going to just want to make sure you're not talking about sex, you're not talking about politics, you're not talking about gender, you're not going to talk about anything, right? And they want me to go, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like if I'm an artist, I don't get to use all the colors in the 64 crayon box.
Maybe. But maybe you get to use all the crayons because you're a crayon artist, but you don't get to use fabric.
What?
Like
The metaphor. I just lost the metaphor.
I'm trying to extrapolate on art supplies. So maybe it's not a limitation of colors of crayons. You've advertised yourself as a crayon artist, right? Like, people have attempted to tell me that I can't talk about politics, or I can't mention the president of the United States, or I can't mention controversial topics. And I try to find out if they're going to say that to me before I sign a contract, because they should hire you. They should not hire me.
Right.
I am not a crayon artist, right? I am a seamstress with fabric and three-dimensional sculptures made out of fabric. No crayons to be found. Somebody may do a better job of incorporating both a little bit. If I'm being really honest, I just got home from a trip where I emceed a spelling bee for the very first time in my life.
Nice.
It's a super nerdy group, and it was the evening entertainment. So people were drinking and having a good time. So it's an evening thing. So I think I'm allowed to be a little edgier. It's a spelling bee, so probably not too edgy. So I dressed up like a bee, like I had a bee hat and a fancy dress, and then was as nerdy as possible. But there are two comments that I said, what is today? Tuesday. I said these 4 days ago, and they are still burning a hole in my brain because I think I went too far. Client didn't complain. Nobody complained. Nobody said anything. And this was all improv based on misspelling words.
What are they? What'd you say?
It was funny. I think context. I think out of context, it would sound very strange. So we will talk about it offline.
I can respect that. Yeah.
But the client loved it. Everybody had a great time. Nobody remembers those 4 lines. I do. That's the artist.
Right. Yeah, I'll tell you a story offline, but I can tell the audience part of my fear of offending people by accident, I think goes right up to that edge where there's some people who say, hey, kind of wake up and learn how the world is and take responsibility for what you don't know and what you're uncomfortable with. And all that's nice and happy and fuzzy, and we're going to move forward together. And other people say you're too PC and you're just overreaching and you're trying to control my freedom or whatever. They're different camps, but I think sometimes they're really close and they cross, right? And I had an audience that I thought crossed that line, because I would say I don't have that much respect for people in our job who say, if they don't like what I say, screw them. They're just too PC. I don't believe that, because I'm in the job of not offending people and understanding how to connect with people. And so why wouldn't I want to learn where they are? But sometimes I think there are audience who are very quick to judge us in a negative way because they're hardwired that way. And they're looking for the words. And let me give you an example. It was in a PC community, a community famous for this. And they just had a speaker on the racism in healthcare, which exists. But it also was a really heavy speaker. And also the speaker was black and the audience was lily white. So I think this audience was supercharged. And right after that person came up, as you know, often at healthcare audiences or conventions, they have a healthcare provider who was a recent patient. And they come and talk about their experience, like, oh, epiphany, because now that I've been a patient, I can see a lot of things, and I'm going to share that patient story with you. So this doctor comes up and just talks about the fact that he's Armenian. And then he says, well, Larry knows that because he's Armenian too. There was no joke in there, and there was nothing to find any offense. But the audience went like this. oh my gosh, there's Armenianism going on or something like that. The audience went nuts in their head when there was nothing there. And I thought to myself, this is why I'm afraid. Because even if I go up there with a clear heart and I ask questions and I try to respect the answers and understand, there's going to be somebody in there who's looking for Armenianism. Like it was the wackiest experience. I don't really know what
Yeah.
my point is, but
No,
like
but
that's real.
No, I think your point is that wouldn't it be nice if we could put a filter on and nothing ever upset anybody, the people looking to be upset and the people who were not looking to be upset, because both of those can have extreme reactions. Wouldn't it be great? And the truth is that does not exist, especially when we're talking about in the moment humor, us our work on stage. This is a live show. You just have to trust, like,
Yeah.
uh, I hear religious belief is a thing, and most of it is based on faith that is all going to work out. And there's sometimes a collective sum, and sometimes no, it doesn't matter the collective sum. It was this one thing, and you can't know.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have a point in any of that. I would like to say though, part of me is jealous of a Dave Chappelle type where audiences go to him, they pay money to see what he does, and they're already kind of on board before he walks on stage. And ours are not like that. Our audiences are things that we have to earn. They come in and they might, in fact, have a major distaste for our topic, and we have to win them over. And I'm proud of that, really, because I think there's not that many people who can do that. To go in, we have a different set of rules. We have to go win a group over. It's, the setup is not as good as what Dave Chappelle has. I mean, the physical production and the staging and the whatever. We're in a crappy place when people are in uncomfortable chairs in a room that's poorly designed. There's got to be art in there somewhere, right, Jess? Come on, that is
100%.
hard.
I mean, when I talk to people or other speakers about like punching up their humor, which is not a funny session, but the first thing I say is that you are not, no keynote anywhere, even at nighttime, no keynote anywhere is ever going to be the same atmosphere as a dungeon bar with the lights down low, thank God, because you don't want to see what it looks like with the lights on, and wobbly tables and weak, watered down, yet very strong drinks with like well liquor that cost $20 a piece, and a disgruntled person, maybe possibly bringing you another one because you have a 2-drink minimum. That is not going to be the atmosphere that we have. We
Right.
have people who are grateful to be away from their children at a conference, hungover from last night,
Yeah.
mandated to be in a room, and they're sitting next to their one coworker that found them as they were entering the room that they have no interest in spending time with.
And they're thinking, if I don't check my email soon, I'm going to have to stay late and do it.
Yes.
Right.
And there might be a buffet in the back of the room.
Right. Or a bar.
It's a different context.
You had me just at dungeon bar because I'm pretty sure you've been in a dungeon bar, and I never have. But I'm not saying I don't want to go. I'm just saying.
I'm thinking of like those comedy bars in New York when I started doing stand-up in New York City, where I didn't know there was stuff underground. Like I know about the subway, but there's like stairs down through a restaurant that humans go to, and then there's stairs down.
Yeah.
And you're like, am I allowed any? Is this safe? Do I need to call my grandmother? Is this okay? And then that's the comedy bar. Good luck. I'm the only woman, the only queer person within, I don't know, 1,000 feet up to the ground level. I'm going to die down here. Want to tell some jokes? That's a hard place to do it, but it is not the same thing as a keynote.
I'm a little disappointed. I don't mind telling you, just because when you said dungeon bar, my head was in a like S&M bar.
Well, I also was a professional dominatrix, but that doesn't always come with a stand-up routine.
Dang it. Your life is so much more fun than mine.
It's
All
just
right,
because
so
my parents died early, so I had to pay my bills.
I'm going to ask you what gives
Wait,
you
did you
hope.
see what I did there? Tragedy, time, comedy.
Ah,
I made a joke about my dead parents.
yeah,
Ha
nothing.
ha!
Nothing's funnier than laughing up about mom and dad, the two dead people.
Hysterical topics, orphanages.
I am going to
Yeah.
ask you about hope, but I'm going to put you on the spot. I feel like partly because you and I had this conversation, we had to do it twice because somebody messed up the technology. I've had to think about Dave Chappelle a lot, and it's been really fun. And I feel like I've learned things over time. I didn't have them down after watching him the first time. I wonder, I'll tell you what my takeaways are, but I'm wondering if you have a takeaway from the whole Dave Chappelle experience of the multiple specials and really hassling the trans community and getting called out, and now he's, canceled-ish. What do you have any takeaways from this?
Well, my takeaways are going to be annoying, probably, but uh, my takeaway of watching The Closer the first time is the evidence of how much power vulnerable conversation can have. And as an upper class, rich man who does not even need to work anymore, he is still fostering and generating conversations. And that is aspirational to me.
Oh, I love that. That's not what I expected.
Mm-hmm.
You feel like just by having these conversations, the world's a better place.
And
So
he's
in many,
doing it from like a teeny tiny town that he loves.
yeah.
I just think it's great.
And I kind of assume we agree about this, that especially from the perspective you just articulated, the fact that there was some controversy over this last special and it got into the mainstream media is great news for him. He's like, great, more conversations.
Click here. I mean, you've watched it multiple times just to prepare for this interview.
Yeah, but also I love the guy. I mean, I just think for so many reasons. One of them is his technique is, I don't even know how to describe it. You can't see technique with him. His technique is invisible.
If I haven't already made people angry, what I think Dave Chappelle and Hannah Gadsby have in common isn't necessarily that they're both threatening to quit comedy. That's a premise. But the way that they weave together permission to get to the next controversial topic is brilliant and something that I've tried my best to emulate stylistically in my own keynotes. And so I have watched all of their specials, specifically Hannah Gadsby, because we talk about very similar topics. But the first time I saw Nanette, I actually mapped it out with different colored note cards
No
because
way.
I'm a nerd.
You are
and
a
I
nerd.
mapped it out and then shuffled them in to see like when was the first reference of this topic. And it's deep inside of a previous topic, but people laugh at it, which then gives you permission to bring it back up as a callback. So Chappelle did the same thing. 30 milliseconds in, he tells a joke about having COVID and not having symptoms. And then the punchline is that he calls himself the Magic Johnson of COVID, which is referencing another black man who is a superstar, who is HIV positive, whose symptoms haven't killed him.
Right.
And it gets a laugh. So now you've just opened the doorway to talk about LGBT folks, specifically gay men, are almost always directly linked to HIV. You're able to talk about what it means. And then he goes from there to it's pretty meta, but about a black man beating up an Asian woman.
Yeah.
And how that in a moment is what COVID is doing to his body, which connects race to this disease that was happening politically. And people laughed, and he proceeds forward. That is a technique that is brilliant. And it also gives him the vibe, right? Like, okay, you laughed at this, we're going to go play Chutes and Ladders over here. You didn't laugh at this, okay, we have to back up a little bit. That's how we do what we do.
That's such an interesting comment. I didn't notice that when watching it, but when you said it, it sounds true. I think, getting permission. Once I have the laugh, and he even says it. I think right after those jokes that are like that, there's a battle in my own body, black against Asian. I think he says, like, if you think that's bad, wait till you hear what's coming. He's kind of
more.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just like unlocked third tier humor when you laughed at that joke, right? Like you can almost hear the vault in his head, like, oh, really? All right. Whoa, boom,
Right.
But that also comes from practice, is that he's probably told that story 100,000 times, and sometimes it didn't work and sometimes it did work.
Right.
Even though it's his live special, who is this audience?
I would have loved to hear this special when he was workshopping it 6 months before we recorded it. I would have loved to hear what that material was.
Interesting.
And
it's
what
actually
order it was in.
One of my favorite stories about Robin Williams, when I was emceeing a Lavender Lounge show in New York, I was right around the corner from the David Letterman studio, and there's like the red light, which means shut up, the green light means go, and then there was a purple light. And the purple light means somebody famous walked in, shut up and get off the stage.
Oh.
And this is like a 5:00 in the evening show, so nobody cares. Get out. So a purple light goes off, so I immediately shut up. Robin Williams, the first time I ever met him, came on stage. He's flailing and sweating and doing his thing and whatever. It was incredible. But the show ended early enough that I could jump on the subway and raced home and watched him on Letterman, right? And he literally did he sweated on cue. He drank water on cue. He must have had a second identical shirt, right? Like, it was the most surreal experience, but that's when I realized that this art is a craft.
Yeah.
This is not just someone sweating and flailing about with their thoughts. This is a craft, and a choice is phenomenal.
I would have loved to see that. Dang it. You've been in a dungeon and you opened in it. Robin Williams. Curses.
I was in a dungeon with Robin Williams.
All right, we're there. What gives you hope?
The ability to have free conversations where we don't know any of the answers.
Oh.
You, Brad Montgomery, you give me hope. What gives you hope?
Yeah, it's similar. I think it's just progress. Meaning, you know me well enough, and I've told you this before. I feel like since COVID started and Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and Me Too and all this stuff, like, I just have not stopped learning. And it just feels like the intensity of my learning has been insane in the last couple of years compared to what I did before, which is like, really? I didn't know that was an issue. I didn't. Cisgender? Right. Never heard of that word.
Moving along.
Right.
You've opened a willingness to learn, so your willingness is being fulfilled.
But it also, it's not just about me. I feel like, the whole world is having this conversation. Not everyone's willing, but, it's getting out there.
There's certainly a trendy vogueness related to it. But I would say that anyone's dedication to learning will be fulfilled. And if you're learning from your privileged places, it's a hell of a lot better than actually facing violence and death. So keep the learning going, right? Like,
yeah,
there will always be more to learn for both of us.
Yeah. Say that again. There'll always be learning forever for both of us.
There'll always be more learning.
Dang it. You mean I'm not going to have this down soon? All right. Well, goodenoughnow.com. That's a website you should learn. But also Jess Pettitt. JessPettitt.com. I was at that website. I love that website.
Thanks.
I love that website. Jess Pettitt is available. If you feel like your group doesn't have the facility to talk about difficult conversations, and having a guide, a decoder, a translator, a teacher would be helpful, you need a good one. And you're looking at her, Jess Pettitt. Jess Pettitt.
Or if you need to MC a spelling bee, I now own a bee costume.
Yeah, with or without just slightly edgy material that passed muster, but made you sweat.
I'm still sweating about it. Uh-huh.
All right. Well, I'm so grateful to you, not for a million reasons. I'm so grateful to you. Thanks for being nice to me. Love you.
100%.
You're good for the world. The world's better because Jess Pettitt is in it.
Clouds and donuts to you, my friend.
Thanks, everybody. Hey, hit share, would you? Hit share. Help me out, would you? This is a good topic. We need to get this out. Thanks, everybody.